A quiet afternoon shattered by flashing lights. A man standing on his own porch, phone in hand, suddenly under suspicion. Neighbors whispering, accusations flying, and the police closing in. But what started as a call about suspicious activity was only the beginning. Behind one locked door sat the real danger, a disturbing secret that had been watching everyone, every moment, for months. No one saw it coming, especially not the man they blamed. Crestwood, Missouri was the kind of place where neighbors kept their lawns neat, waved politely at passing cars, and stopped to chat outside the mailbox. It was the type of neighborhood where folks noticed if you didn't show up to the annual block party, and if your grass got too long, someone would knock on your door, just to check in. But even in a place like Crestwood, every neighborhood had that one person, the one who didn't quite fit the mold. For Crestwood, that person was Darius Coleman. Darius had lived in the neighborhood for almost 3 years, but if you asked anyone what they knew about him, they'd come up empty. He worked from home, kept his yard tidy, and didn't bother anyone. He didn't join the neighborhood barbecue. He didn't show up for the summer garage sale. He never lingered to chat with the neighbors during his morning walks. It wasn't that Darius was rude. He was just private, quiet. A man who valued his own space, but in Crestwood, keeping to yourself didn't go unnoticed. Some neighbors, especially the longtime residents, didn't quite trust people who didn't make an effort to blend in. To them, being a good neighbor meant being a visible one. That quiet suspicion had simmered just below the surface for years, until one ordinary Thursday afternoon, when Darius stepped outside his front door, phone in hand, and unknowingly set off a chain of events that would shatter the neighborhood's sense of safety. By the time it was all over, Crestwood would never look at Darius, or their own neighbors, the same way again. The first sign that something was wrong came in small, frustrating moments. Nothing major, just little things that didn't sit right. At first, Darius Coleman thought his internet was just acting up. His video calls kept freezing mid-sentence, his music buffered more than usual, and his security camera feed took longer than expected to load. Minor inconveniences. Annoying, but nothing serious. But Darius wasn't the type to ignore things that didn't add up. He liked knowing how things worked, and more importantly, he liked knowing when something wasn't working the way it should. So that afternoon, after wrapping up a long morning of work, he decided to check his Wi-Fi settings. He pulled out his phone, logged into his router, and scrolled through the list of connected devices. That's when he saw it. Nestled between his laptop, his phone, and his smart TV was a device he didn't recognize. Its name wasn't some random string of letters and numbers like most unknown connections. This one had a name. Town Square 01. Darius frowned. He lived alone. He wasn't the kind of guy to hand out his Wi-Fi password, and he certainly hadn't connected any new devices recently. So who or what was Town Square 01? A flicker of unease ran through him. Someone was using his network, and if they had access to his internet, what else did they have access to? Without hesitation, Darius took action. He booted every unfamiliar device off the network and changed his password on the spot. His new one was long, complicated, and impossible to guess. That should have been the end of it. Just to be sure, he stepped outside onto his porch, trying to get a better signal while finalizing the update. As he leaned against the railing, phone in hand, the warm Georgia sun beating down on his back, he had no idea someone was watching him. From across the street, Wayne Tucker, one of Crestwood's oldest residents, sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in one hand, eyes locked on Darius. He had always been suspicious of the man next door, too quiet, too distant, never interested in small talk. And now here Darius was, standing on his porch, staring at his phone, typing away with a focused intensity. Wayne's gut told him something was off. He didn't know what, but he knew, and in a town like Crestwood, when something didn't feel right, there was only one thing to do. Wayne reached for his phone and dialed 911. Yeah, I need to report something suspicious. Wayne Tucker didn't trust people who kept to themselves. He'd lived in Crestwood, Missouri for over 30 years, and in all that time he'd come to believe that good neighbors were the kind who waved from their front porch, showed up to the Memorial Day cookout, and made small talk at the corner store. Folks who didn't, folks like Darius Coleman, made him uneasy. It wasn't just that Darius was quiet. It was that he didn't seem to care about fitting in. No friendly chats, no barbecues, no interest in Wayne's stories about how the neighborhood used to be. Darius kept his head down, minding his own business like Crestwood was just a place to sleep, not a community to belong to. Wayne never said it out loud, but the fact that Darius was a black man in a mostly white neighborhood didn't help his standing either. Wayne would never call himself racist, but the truth was, Darius already had 2 strikes against him. So when Wayne saw Darius standing on his porch, phone in hand, tapping away with an almost nervous intensity, that was it. In Wayne's mind, it was clear. He's up to something. Wayne leaned back in his chair, coffee cooling beside him, eyes narrowing. Maybe Darius was hacking into someone's account. Maybe he was spying on people. Hell, maybe he was scamming the whole neighborhood from that phone of his. Wayne didn't know how tech worked, but he knew trouble when he saw it. He pulled out his own phone, fingers trembling slightly with righteous conviction, and dialed 911. "Yeah, this is Wayne Tucker, over on Magnolia Street," he said, his voice low but urgent. "There's a man across the street, standing on his porch. He's been messing with his phone for a while now. Looks suspicious. You better send someone over to check it out." The dispatcher asked for details. What exactly was Darius doing? Was he armed? Had he made any threats? Wayne didn't have answers to any of that. All he could say was, "I've had a bad feeling about this guy for a while now. You just need to send someone." By the time Wayne hung up, his pulse was racing. Across the street, Darius was back inside, unaware that his quiet afternoon had just turned into a police matter. And the worst part, the person who actually was spying on the neighborhood was a lot closer than Wayne realized. The first thing Darius noticed was the low rumble of tires slowing to a crawl outside his house. He glanced out the front window, expecting maybe a delivery truck or a lost driver pulling a U-turn. Instead, a county sheriff's cruiser sat at the curb, 2 deputies stepping out, their eyes locked on his front door. Darius felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the one he'd learned to live with as a black man in a mostly white neighborhood. He'd done nothing wrong, but experience had taught him that being innocent didn't always matter. The taller deputy, Craig Reynolds, knocked firmly, his posture squared, one hand resting close to his belt. Not quite threatening, but close enough to make a point. Beside him stood Deputy Maria Ortega, her expression neutral, her eyes scanning the yard like she was already trying to piece together a story. Darius opened the door, keeping his hands visible at his sides. "Afternoon, officers. Something I can help you with." Reynolds didn't smile. "We got a call from a neighbor about some suspicious activity. Mind telling us what you were doing outside earlier?" Darius blinked, caught off guard. "Suspicious? I was changing my Wi-Fi password." Ortega glanced at Reynolds, then back at Darius. "Why outside?" "Better signal," Darius said flatly. He could feel his patience thinning, but he kept his voice even. "There's nothing illegal about that." Before either deputy could respond, a voice rang out from across the street. Darius didn't even have to look. He knew exactly who it was. Wayne Tucker stood on his porch, arms crossed tight across his chest. He's always out there, pacing around, messing with his phone, watching people. "I've seen it." Darius's jaw clenched. "You mean minding my own business?" Reynolds raised a hand, silencing both men. "We just need to clear this up. Would you mind showing us your Wi-Fi settings?" It was humiliating, standing there on his own front porch, asked to prove his innocence over something so ridiculous. But Darius knew how easily these things could spiral. "Fine," he muttered, unlocking his phone and handing it over. Reynolds and Ortega leaned in, scanning the screen. That's when Ortega's brow furrowed. "What's this device?" she asked, pointing at Town Square 01, still connected. Darius' summit dropped. "I was hoping you could tell me," he said, "because it's not mine." For the first time, the deputies exchanged a look of real concern. Suddenly, this wasn't about Darius anymore. It was about something, or someone, else entirely. Deputy Ortega's finger hovered over the unfamiliar device name, Town Square 01, still showing as connected to Darius's Wi-Fi network. "That's the one I kicked off earlier," Darius said, voice tight with frustration. "I changed my password after I saw it, but somehow it's still connected." Reynolds' expression hardened. "You're saying someone hacked into your Wi-Fi?" "Looks that way," Darius replied. "I live alone. I don't give my password out to anyone. There's no reason any other device should be connected." Ortega's eyes narrowed slightly. "You ever have trouble with your security cameras? Doorbell cam acting up? Feeds lagging? Darius's brow creased. Yeah, actually, that's part of why I checked the router in the first place. She stepped back, pulling out her radio. We might need someone from cybercrimes out here, she muttered to Reynolds, low enough that Darius barely caught it. Wayne Tucker, still watching from across the street, cupped his hands around his mouth. Told you he was up to something. Darius turned sharply toward him. I'm the one getting hacked, Wayne. His voice cracked with anger. Months, maybe years of built-up frustration breaking through. Maybe if you spent less time spying on me and more time paying attention to your own damn house, you'd know that. Wayne's mouth opened but no words came out. Hold on, Ortega said, her voice cutting through the tension. If someone's got access to your Wi-Fi, what exactly can they see? Darius took a steadying breath, forcing himself to think clearly. If they've been in my network long enough, they could have access to everything. My laptop, my phone, my cameras. Your cameras, Reynolds repeated. As in, inside your house? Darius's stomach churned. Yeah, I've got cameras in the living room, backyard, front porch, all of it. He walked back into the house, deputies following close behind, and sat down at his laptop. His fingers moved quickly, pulling up the activity logs from his security system. As the list loaded, his heart pounded. There, in black and white, were timestamps of someone remotely accessing his camera feeds. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times. Son of a, Reynolds muttered. But it wasn't just Darius's cameras. A separate log showed connections to cameras belonging to other homes in the neighborhood, including Wayne Tucker's. Darius looked up, dread settling in his chest. This isn't just me. Someone's been spying on all of us. For the first time all afternoon, Wayne was speechless. Darius's hands hovered over his laptop keyboard, his heart pounding in his ears as he stared at the list of compromised cameras. Some belonged to homes 2 or 3 doors down, others across the street. The most chilling discovered Wayne Tucker's front porch camera, the same camera Wayne used to keep an eye on Darius, had been accessed too. Deputy Ortega leaned in, her brow furrowed. Can you trace where the access is coming from? Darius's fingers moved quickly, cross-referencing the IP logs with the neighborhood's known Wi-Fi networks. His breath caught in his throat as the data pulled up a familiar address, one barely 50 yards away. Wait, Darius muttered. This can't be right. Reynolds stepped close. What is it? Darius swallowed hard, turning the laptop screen toward the deputies. The signal, it's coming from inside the neighborhood. Ortega leaned in, reading the screen. Whose house? Darius's jaw clenched. Wayne Tucker's. The silence that followed was heavy. Wayne, still standing on his porch, arms crossed, was watching their every move. Hold on now, Wayne called out, his voice defensive. You're trying to blame me for this. Reynolds shook his head. Not you, he said, but someone in your... Wayne's frown deepened, confusion flickering across his face. Ain't nobody in my house but me and... His voice trailed off. His skin went pale as realization dawned. Oh, hell. Darius stood up, anger simmering just below the surface. That's right. Your nephew, Cody Tuck, 24 years old, recently unemployed, moved back in with his uncle a few months earlier. The kid barely spoke to anyone, but Darius had seen him a handful of times, always glued to his laptop, sitting in the garage or on the back porch. Wayne shook his head, denial warring with disbelief. Cody wouldn't. Want to bet? Darius cut him off. Voice, because someone's been watching me, watching all of us. And the signal is coming straight from your damn house. Ortega's radio crackled to life, but she barely heard it. We need to talk to him, she said, voice low and firm. Reynolds glanced at Wayne. Where's Cody now? Wayne stood frozen, mouth slightly open, staring at the laptop screen. For once, the man who was always so sure of everything had no answer. The air felt heavier with every step as Wayne Tucker led deputies Reynolds and Ortega up the short path to his front door. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a silence that made the creak the porch boards sound louder than it should have. Inside, the house was dim, the curtains half drawn even though the afternoon sun was still bright outside. Wayne cleared his throat, his voice rough. Cody, get down here, now. No. Ortega exchanged a glance with Reynolds, her hand drifting closer to her holster. Let's check upstairs, she said quietly. Wayne stayed behind, standing near the door with his arms folded tightly across his chest. His face was flushed, not just with anger, but with something closer to shame. The deputies took the stairs 2 at a time, their boots thudding softly against the worn wood. At the end of the hall, Cody's bedroom door stood half open, dim blue light spilling from inside. Reynolds knocked once, sharp and loud. "Cody Tucker, Sheriff's Office. We need to talk." There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence. Then the sound of a chair trace across the floor. The door opened a crack, revealing Cody, his face pale, his eyes darting between the 2 deputies. "What's this about?" Cody asked, his voice tight, fingers twitching nervously at his sides. Ortega didn't bother easing into it. "We traced illegal access to neighborhood security cameras back to this house, and your devices." Cody's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His eyes flicked to the laptop on his desk. Your monitors, tangled cords, a setup far more elaborate than any casual gamer would need. Reynolds stepped forward. "Why don't you tell us how long you've been spying on your neighbors?" "I didn't." Cody started, but his voice cracked. "It was just a joke at first." Ortega's expression hardened. "A joke? Watching people in their homes? Their bedrooms?" Cody took a step back, his skin blotchy and red. "I didn't think it was a big deal. I wasn't hurting anybody." From downstairs, Wayne's voice echoed up the stairwell. "What the hell's going on up there?" Reynolds snapped the cuffs onto Cody's wrists. "You're under arrest for unauthorized access of computer networks and unlawful surveillance." As Cody's head hung low, footsteps pounded up the stairs. Wayne appeared, eyes wide, disbelief melting into humiliation, as he stared at his handcuffed nephew. And just like that, all the suspicion Wayne had aimed at Darius turned back on his own family. Cody Tucker barely resisted as Deputy Reynolds led him down the narrow staircase, the handcuffs digging into his wrists with every step. His head stayed down, messy hair falling into his face, his eyes locked on the scuffed hardwood floor beneath his feet. Wayne stood at the bottom of the stairs, his broad shoulders tense, arms hanging limp at his sides. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of what had just unfolded upstairs had knocked the air right out of him. "Wayne, I'm gonna need you to step back," Reynolds said firmly, his hand resting near Cody's arm. Wayne didn't argue. He just stared at his nephew, his face a twisted mix of anger, confusion, and something close to heartbreak. "Cody," his voice cracked. "What the hell were you thinking?" Cody didn't answer. What could he say? Darius stood on his own porch, watching the scene unfold from across the street. His jaw was tight, his arms folded across his chest, his phone still in hand, the same phone that had triggered all of this. For a moment, Wayne's eyes met Darius's. There was no hostility left in Wayne's face, just shame. Deep, cutting shame. Darius didn't look away. He held Wayne's gaze, letting the silence say what words could. It was Darius who finally broke it. "All that time you spent watching me," Darius said, his voice low but firm. "And the real threat was living under your roof. The whole time." Wayne flinched, as if the words struck harder than a punch. Melanie Foster, one of the other neighbors, had stepped onto her porch, arms crossed, whispering to her husband as the patrol car's lights washed across the street. The whole neighborhood would know by morning. Ortega opened the back door of the cruiser, guiding Cody inside. He didn't say a word. No excuses, no apologies. Wayne stood there, rooted in place, long after the patrol car drove off. He looked around the neighborhood, as if seeing it for the first time, not the way he wanted it to be, but the way it really was. Darius turned and walked back into his house, the screen door slamming shut behind him. He didn't wait for an apology. He didn't need one. What he needed was something far more rare, for people like Wayne to finally start asking themselves why they were so quick to assume the worst about people who looked like him. Some lessons come too late. In neighborhoods across America, people like Wayne Tucker think they know who belongs and who doesn't. They rely on gut feelings, shaped by bias they'd never admit to having. But assumptions, especially those rooted in lies, can blind us to the real danger, the ones hiding in plain sight. Darius Coleman was judged for being quiet, for keeping to himself, for being different. But the threat wasn't the man minding his business. It was the familiar face living under Wayne's roof. Suspicion, unchecked, turns into paranoia. Paranoia leads to injustice. And sometimes, the truth only comes out when it's far too late. Before you judge someone based on fear, stop and ask, What are you really? Stories like this aren't just fiction. They reflect what's happening in neighborhoods across America right now. In a world where technology connects everything, your privacy is never guaranteed. Whether it's an unknown device on your Wi-Fi or a camera you thought was secure, someone could be watching without you even knowing. But the bigger lesson is about assumptions. Judging people based on race, silence, or simply being different doesn't protect communities. It divides. True safety comes from understanding, not suspicion. Before jumping to conclusions, ask questions, get the facts. And remember, the real threat isn't always the stranger down the street. Sometimes it's someone closer to her. If you want more stories that open your eyes and make you think, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next.